Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses, Crazy Quilting and Beyond. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the foundation stitching that I'm using on the block. The seams are basic and simple, but it does set the foundation for everything else that's still to come. I've already started doing some embroidery on it. So each of these blocks has on the pink are embroidered with variegations on feather stitch, and they're actually all embroidered with the same thread that had a little bit of variety in it. It's sort of a pink variegated with a little bit of yellow and almost leans to a little bit of purple in spots. Then on each of these fan blocks, I've already sort of pre-stitched some of my border using a turquoise and a bright green. And on one of the fans, I've completed the 4 base part of the seams. I'm using 3 different templates to mark these seams. One is just an OmniGrid ruler. It's got nice clear 1/8 inch markings. I also like that it has the 3/16 seam, and then the 1/8 is marked as well. Sometimes the one that's my favorite is an old one that's not made anymore that Dritz used to make. It's got very clear markings. It's yellowed with age here, but it's got 1/8 inch markings and a good nice 1/4 inch. I also like the fact that it's got the centimeter marking, even though this is a little harder to use to actually mark with. I can measure with it. So I actually use this one quite a lot, and it's got these wonderful scallops. I'm not going to use that on this, but sometimes I can see this really clearly when I'm laying it down, and I like to use that one. It's a little easier for me to focus on that 1/4 inch seam than this one, because this one's got so many competing lines going on. The other one that I'm using is this one that is, I believe, a template for scrapbooking or journaling. And while most of the markers that I use for marking don't fit through the hole, I can usually line up just along the edge with what I'm doing. And this one is marked at a 3/16 grid, which is nice because nearly every other ruler is at 1/8. So it gives me a little variety in stitch. So I will line it up. I want my first mark to be right at the edge of the fan. I'm using an air erasable fabric marking pen. There's several brands of these. There's one, and they're virtually the same. So it really doesn't matter which one. I find that these come off very reliably, and if they don't fade, a little bit of water takes them right away. It's my primary marking pen if I'm going to be marking a seam. So I'm just going to go along and mark this one because I'm going to do just a straight buttonhole, and I want it that 3/16 inch square. I'm going to just mark out at my outer edge, and that's the only marks I'm going to make, one at each 3/16 position all the way down the line. I also mark the ones that I'm not stitching because I will carry the stitch through here, so I want to know where it is going to be, and that helps me finish it off. So I'm going to start in the corner, and I actually would like to take my very first stitch right here on the edge. I want that seam to be there, so I'm going to just make a really tiny stitch. Now there's a lot of ways to do this, but this is my preferred. I like to carry that pattern through right from the very beginning, and it helps anchor my stitches and keeps them nice and even the whole way. And so I'm coming up really just on the edge here of that seam. Move it up so you can see it a little easier. And again, that's a heavy seam with this brocade fabric that's here, so the thimble really comes in handy. Going down, coming up, making sure that I'm going over my thread so it catches. And because I'm working without a hoop, I want to pull my stitches so that they're nice and straight, but I don't pull them too tight, otherwise I'll pucker the fabric. And see, there's that one mark gives me all the guidance that I need to stitch a nice even buttonhole. And I keep my needle parallel to the stitch before it. And if my first stitch was correct, then the rest of them should line up as well. So here I'm to this one that's up here. I'm not going to take my stitch all the way there, but I am going to take it to here, maintain the pattern. I'm just going to do one more stitch right down. Since I've done a slightly wider seam here, I probably want to do something a little bit narrower here. I would like to use one of these stitch patterns that has some height variation on it, but I want to do something a little bit different than what I did the last time. I had drawn out some ideas, and I think on this one I'm going to dress it up a little bit. I think I'm going to do a grouped one like this. And so I'll keep these probably about 1/8 of an inch apart. We're going to start in the middle of the gap. So this is one of the few that I don't want to start the stitch right on the edge of the fan. I actually want a little bit of a gap. And so I need to think about my gap. So if I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row, I actually think I want a 1/2 inch gap. So at this front, I actually want a 1/4 inch gap. That'll be half of the gap. And again, I'm going to line it up with the 3/16. There's my 1/4 inch mark. That's actually going to be my very first stitch. One, skip one. So basically I'm marking 3 of them. They take up the space of about 1/2 inch. We're going to skip a 1/2 inch. 1. So they're basically at 1/4 inch intervals. Skip a 1/2 inch. 1, 2, 3. Skip a 1/2 inch. 1, 2, 3. And that'll actually bring my pattern down really nice. I would come back in here. So my last or first stitch of the next pattern group falls, and I kind of got off here, so it's right about here. Sometimes with these rulers it's a little hard to see. I wish they would make finer lines sometimes on these, and it's one of the reasons this was thinner, and so sometimes it's easier to actually see through it. And I think if I look at it, it looks like it's lining up well enough. I think I can see through this. I can pick up where my other ones are and mark the ones in between. Make sure we're in the right spot. So there we are, lined up along that seam as much as you can. It's not always going to be perfect, but there we are. There's my mark there. And then I've got 1, 2, 3. So we're going on the in-between one. And then I'm going to angle this a little bit just because the seam angles just a little bit, and I do want to still try to maintain some consistency, and mark the 2 in between. All right, now we're ready to stitch. In this one, I'm going to pull right up here at the corner, trying to make sure I'm staying really consistent in there. Go to my first dot. same as we did on the last seam, just pulling, providing tension without buckling the fabric. It lays nice and flat. Now we've got a really long stitch. Go over to that next one. When I'm so far apart, I do like to make sure am I staying nice and even. I'm not getting angled. And we'll finish the seam in the same manner. Marking another seam. This one's just going to be a simple 1/8 inch, basically an 1/8 inch grid. So I'm just doing a mark every 1/8 of an inch, about an 1/8 of an inch away from the last seam. And because this is a pretty basic seam, pretty similar to what we've done before, I'm just going to go ahead and stitch this up without too much commentary. Now I'm on the upper blade of the fan, and for this one I'm going to do a closed buttonhole stitch. It's a stitch that it gives just a really nice look to it. You get these wonderful triangles. You can see along here, and I thought it would accent the outer edge of the fan nicely. As I've been thinking about it, I may actually take it up both sides of this particular piece, again just to make it look like it's the fancier top of the fan. It's actually a pretty easy stitch to do, but it does require 2 lines of marking, both the top and the bottom, and I'm consistently using my 3/16 inch scale. So I'm going to start by marking the bottom, and I think it's easier to see, and I apologize for the glare that you get on these templates, but I have my mark lined up with the outer corner, so my triangle will go this way here. I'm not going to start mid triangle, so I'm going to mark every other one. And now I make sure that I'm lined up with my marks, and so now I'm going to move over one and mark the in between. And so to stitch this one, I'm going to come up at the corner here, as I have done on all the others, and on this one, instead of the needle going perpendicular to the seam, it's going at almost a 45-degree angle. So I've made one little angled stitch. It's caught here. I know that it's hard to see, but it really has caught the edge of that. I'm going to go back to that same top dot and enter it again, but this time I'm going up to my upper dot, and again going over my thread, and so you can see I'm catching it. So this part actually looks very much like a feather stitch, and truthfully, if you can do buttonhole stitch, you can do feather stitch, because this is the next closest cousin to a feather stitch. And then I'm coming up just next to, but not inside, the last triangle. I want each triangle to be its own combination. And I missed my loop, so it's not hard. I just make sure I'm not twisting it, catch it, come back up through it if I can hold on to the needle long enough, and now I'm catching it again. So I always hold that thread off to the side with my thumb, but sometimes when you're stitching it shifts slightly. So, and back up to the same one. And it just makes a very nice little triangular pattern. So here we are, a little bit closer look at this, and you can see this triangular pattern coming in. And I'll keep stitching here. So again, holding that thread out of the way a little bit, coming up to the dot, coming up right next to, but not inside the other triangle. So it's almost a straight stitch, just the tip caught. And over here, and you may notice that I'm not always coming up right in my mark, and that's again because I'm eyeballing, making adjustments, and I know I'm trying to come up just on the outside edge of that. Now we've got all 4 seams done on block 3, except I do think I am going to come back up this side. So one of the issues I'm going to have is how am I going to deal with this corner? Well, I'm going to start by marking from the top down, and when I get down here, and these points right here are going to just about match, I may make a cross over there and we'll just leave it. So I just need to mark it, and I'll get that done and get that stitched, and we'll take a look at it. So I got the stitching done up the back side, and I really actually like the way that this is looking. One of the things I'm noticing, and I need to see how it comes once I start adding the secondary embroidery to this, is I'm thinking I need to do something along this upper edge. It's looking a little unfinished to me, and so I'm thinking there will be some stitching along there. I just haven't decided what I want to do with that yet, and I may need to do something slightly different. I may need to bring this stitching through so each seam carries through around the corner to make that finish off and look nice. But I'm pleased with how it's looking. In future videos I hope to do quite a bit more with taking a basic seam and doing something extra with it. Maybe variations on the basic seams like I've done here, variations in how to add things to them to make fancier seams. There's a lot to come with these videos. For now, I'm going to finish stitching this and not film the rest of it. I'm having a lot of fun, and I hope that you're learning something new about crazy quilting that you might not have known before. So leave me a comment, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Happy stitching. It's time to go create something beautiful.